For generations, if you said the name Boeing, it was, synonymous with the absolute pinnacle of American industrial power.
Oh, absolutely. Engineering excellence. It brought to mind things like the 747, the Queen of the Skies.
Or even the incredibly complex satellites and missiles that, define global defense strategy.
Right. This is a true global aerospace giant. It's a pillar of U.S. manufacturing. They design everything from the jets we all fly on to the most advanced defense systems on the planet.
And by dollar value, it's historically the largest single exporter in the entire United States.
But if you've been following the news at all, that flawless image has been systematically dismantled over the past 6 years or so.
The contrast is just jarring. On one side, you have this incredible history of dominance.
And on the other, a relentless series of crises. We're talking catastrophic 737 MAX crashes, that chilling door plug blowout on the Mach 9.
Massive layoffs, and a corporate culture that critics just keep pointing to.
Yeah, they accuse it of prioritizing cost savings and, schedules over the foundational engineering, and, critically, over human safety.
That deep, really painful divergence between what they can do and what they have been doing is exactly why we're doing this deep dive.
Right. We're not just here to rehash the headlines you already know.
Our mission is to extract the crucial context from all the sources. We want to move beyond the headlines to understand the structural, the cultural, and the financial factors that they trace back over a century and have led to this moment.
To this unprecedented safety crisis and this profound public mistrust.
Our goal is to give you a holistic, a really nuanced view.
We're going to track the company's history. We'll analyze the consequences of that pivotal 1997 merger.
We'll dissect the mechanics of the safety crises, examine the complex financial headwinds, the ones that fueled all those controversial stock buybacks.
And we'll analyze the dramatic 2024 labor unrest. Then finally, we'll unpack their complex, often politically charged, global footprint.
We're talking defense contracts, environmental commitments, all of it.
We're talking about a company whose future depends entirely on reconciling its legendary engineering standards with shareholder expectations that, they often demand speed and cost-cutting above all else.
By the end of this, you'll understand the competing forces driving this aerospace behemoth. Okay, let's unpack this. So we have to start at the beginning, tracking how this industrial giant was built piece by piece over more than a century.
It was officially established in Seattle, Washington on July 15th, 1916.
And it started with a really straightforward name, Pacific Aero Products Company.
Which is fitting, I guess, for a company founded by a lumber industrialist, William E. Boeing. They renamed it the Boeing Airplane Company pretty quickly in 1917.
And what's important about this early era, especially by the late 20s, is this strategy of aggressive vertical integration, right?
Oh, absolutely. That meant controlling every single step of the process, from designing and building the plane to, operating the system that used it.
And that strategy really hit its peak in 1929 when the corporation was renamed the United Aircraft and Transport Corporation. How big was this thing?
It was immense. I mean, think of it as a pre-depression aerospace monopoly.
So they didn't just build the planes.
No, they owned the companies that built the engines, built the parts, and they owned the airlines that flew the aircraft.
Wow.
They were acquired entities that are now global powerhouses in their own right. I'm talking Sikorsky, Pratt & Whitney, Stearman Aircraft.
Yeah.
They controlled the entire U.S. aerospace ecosystem.
But as we see so often when there's that much power concentrated in one place, that vertical integration didn't last. The government eventually stepped in.
Correct. The sheer scale of the company and the potential for anti-competitive practices led the government to intervene.
So what happened?
First, in 1931, the smaller airlines they owned were merged into what became United Airlines. Then in 1934, the government mandated a formal separation. You had to separate aircraft manufacturing from air transportation.
And that mandate just dissolved the United Aircraft and Transport Corporation.
Exactly. It split it into three major, distinct, independent groups.
You got the Boeing Airplane Company focusing just on manufacturing.
Yep. Then you had United Aircraft, which later became United Technologies, focusing on components like engines.
And finally, United Airlines for commercial transport.
Right. So this early history shows that even for the current crises, government regulation and these big structural decisions have profoundly shaped Boeing's identity.
But even with that mandated split, Boeing kept up its aggressive pattern of diversification. It wasn't just about commercial jets.
Not at all. In 1960, they acquired Vertol Aircraft Corporation, the largest independent helicopter maker at the time.
And then into the 60s and 70s, they just pushed into completely new frontiers.
Space travel, marine craft, agriculture, energy production, even transit systems. The company really defined itself as a comprehensive aerospace and defense conglomerate, not just an airplane builder.
And the culture, that underlying culture, was all about technical innovation.
Deep engineering expertise, prioritizing performance, safety, and excellence above all else.
That engineering-first culture, that's the foundation. But all of our sources, every single one, point to one specific event that fundamentally cracked that foundation.
The 1997 merger.
The merger with McDonnell Douglas, finalized August 1st, 1997.
In retrospect, analysts, historians, former employees, they all see this transaction as the inflection point. The moment that fundamentally shifted Boeing's corporate DNA away from that engineering-first operation toward one dominated by financial management.
It's fascinating because the deal wasn't even entirely smooth. The European Commission actually raised major antitrust objections at first.
They did. That just shows you the scale of the combined entity. The merger only went through after Boeing agreed to meet 3 specific conditions from the EC.
What were they?
They had to terminate exclusivity agreements with a few U.S. airlines. They had to keep separate accounting for the McDonnell Douglas civil aircraft business, and this is maybe the most telling part, they had to make some of their defense patents available to competitors.
So they jumped through these regulatory hoops, but the real damage, the real change, was internal. It was cultural.
It was deeply corrosive. This is the aha moment if you really want to understand the context for the 737 Amex crisis decades later.
So what was it?
Sources, like the reporting in Quartz and the documentary Downfall, describe a profound and deeply toxic clash of corporate cultures.
On one side, you have Boeing's engineers who were focused on safety margins, on technical excellence.
And on the other, you had McDonnell Douglas's bean counters, focused ruthlessly on the bottom line. Cost management, speed to market, shareholder value.
And the bean counters won.
They won the internal power struggle. The McDonnell Douglas mindset, which prioritized maximizing financial returns, executing massive stock buybacks, aggressive cost-cutting, that became the dominant corporate philosophy.
A total transition away from the core Boeing values.
And many analysts argue this shift directly laid the groundwork for the systemic failures that would emerge decades later with the 737 MX.
And that shift in priority was soon reflected physically, with leadership literally moving away from the engineers.
That's such a powerful metaphor, isn't it? For most of its history, the corporate headquarters had been in Seattle, minutes away from the massive manufacturing facilities in Everett and Renton.
Right next to the action.
Exactly. Then, in 2001, the headquarters moved to Chicago. This created a physical separation, putting senior leadership hundreds of miles away from the design teams, the assembly lines, the manufacturing floor.
And they moved again recently, which just cemented this idea of prioritizing political access over manufacturing oversight.
Yes. In May 2022, they announced they were transferring the global headquarters to Crystal City, Arlington, Virginia.
Right outside Washington, D.C.
Precisely. And the company was explicit. They said this move was partly to concentrate on defense work and ensure proximity to our customers and stakeholders.
Which is just corporate speak for the U.S. government, the Pentagon, and lobbyists.
Of course. This move solidified the company's increasing focus on its defense, space, and security segment. And it dramatically intensified what critics called the disconnect between Boeing's senior management and other members of the organization on safety culture.
And that disconnect became impossible to ignore after the January 2024 Alaska Airlines incident. Did shareholders try to reverse that move?
They did. A shareholder proposal was put forward to relocate the HQ back to Seattle, specifically to improve engineering oversight.
And what happened?
The board soundly dismissed it.
Of course they did.
That refusal just underlines the ongoing priority. Access to Washington and those massive defense contracts clearly outweighed the cost of the cultural and geographical separation for their core manufacturing base.
So after all that history, where does that leave the company today? Based on the 2024 financials, Boeing is this massive entity resting on 3 main pillars.
Right. And the 3 pillars are relatively evenly balanced in revenue, which is vital to understand. The profits from 2 often stabilize the losses from the 3rd.
Okay, so first up is Boeing Defense, Space and Security, BDS.
This is currently the largest revenue share, 36% of 2024 revenue, or about $24 billion.
And this is the division that builds military aircraft, missiles, satellites, rockets.
All of it. It is the powerhouse that often keeps the entire company financially afloat when the commercial side is, grounded.
Next is Boeing Commercial Airplanes, BCA.
This is the high-profile, highly volatile division. This is your 737, 767, 777, and 787 jets. It made up about 34% of 2024 revenue, so almost $23 billion.
With the big manufacturing hubs in Washington State and South Carolina.
Correct.
And third, Boeing Global Services, or BGS.
This is the service arm. Aftermarket support, maintenance, upgrades, training for all the equipment sold by both BCA and BDS. It's about 30% of revenue, $20 billion.
And it's a crucial, stable, recurring revenue stream.
Exactly. Understanding that the defense and services side provides the stability for the crisis-ridden commercial side is absolutely essential to grasping Boeing's current structure.
So, if the 1997 merger was the cultural inflection point, then the 737 AX tragedies, that's the moment the cultural shift manifested in catastrophic failure.
It started in quick succession in 2018 and 2019.
Devastating events.
The Lion Air crash in October 2018 and the Ethiopian Airlines crash in March 2019 resulted in the deaths of 346 people.
And the entire aviation world just reacted with shock and speed.
It led to the worldwide grounding of all 387 of the 737 MAX aircraft that were in service.
Now, the technical issue was famously tied to the MCS system. For those who aren't aviation engineers, MCS wasn't an accessory, was it? It was a fundamental modification.
It was absolutely necessary. You see, Boeing needed to maintain the 737 airframe for the MAX, largely to save time and money.
Okay.
But the new, larger, more fuel-efficient engines had to be mounted slightly further forward and higher up on the wing. And that placement subtly changed the aircraft's aerodynamics.
It created a tendency for the plane's nose to pitch up.
Aggressively in certain maneuvers, which is dangerous because they can lead to a stall. So, to compensate, Boeing designed MSAS. It's a flight stabilizing feature implemented entirely through software. Its job was to automatically push the nose down when it sensed the plane was pitching too high.
So it was designed to mimic the safer flight characteristics of the older 737 models.
Exactly. The problem wasn't the idea of MSAS, but how it was implemented and, more importantly, how it was concealed.
And the concealment was tied directly back to that cost-cutting culture we talked about. The goal was to avoid mandatory, expensive simulator training for pilots.
Precisely. If the MAX was considered too different, the FAA would have required all pilots to go through expensive, time-consuming simulator training.
So by making MCS operate largely in the background and not fully documenting it in the pilot manuals,
Boeing was able to convince regulators that minimal computer-based training would be enough.
wow.
And the U.S. House investigation found that assuming simulator training wouldn't be necessary, diminished safety, minimized the value of pilot training, and inhibited technical design improvements.
It was a decision where saving money on training trumped full disclosure.
And it trumped rigorous safety protocols. That investigation also uncovered systemic failures at the corporate level.
It detailed, numerous instances where Boeing dismissed employee concerns?
Right. The sources explicitly state the company prioritized deadline and budget constraints over safety and showed a complete lack of transparency with the FAA.
This was the bean counterculture actively undermining engineering integrity.
And this failure resulted in an immense financial and legal reckoning for the company, the biggest penalty being the Deferred Prosecution Agreement, the DPA.
So what was that?
In January 2021, Boeing settled a criminal conspiracy charge for fraud related to misleading the FAA. The DPA totaled over $2.5 billion.
$2.5 billion.
It was broken into three parts: a criminal penalty of about $244 million, $1.77 billion in damages to the airline customers, and a $500 million fund for the crash victims' families.
And the DPA allowed Boeing to avoid formal prosecution.
As long as they complied with specific oversight mandates for 3 years.
But the penalties kept coming even after that.
Oh, yeah. In September 2022, Boeing paid another $200 million fine to the SEC for misleading investors about the safety issues. The legal fallout was just brutal.
And beyond the money, the legal fight included a deeply disturbing detail about victim suffering.
This specific detail from a 2023 court filing it's shocking. In documents for the Ethiopian Airlines crash, Boeing lawyers disputed that the victims experienced pain and suffering in the final 6 minutes.
What was their argument?
Their argument, which the source material called preposterous, was that because the aircraft hit the ground at the speed of sound, the victims died too quickly to feel pain or emotional distress.
So they were arguing that the speed of the death minimized their financial liability.
Exactly. The plaintiffs, of course, vehemently counter this, arguing that passengers undeniably suffered horrific emotional distress, pain, and suffering as they plummeted to the ground,
It just shows the company operating in full financial defense mode.
trying to minimize the costs associated with the catastrophic human consequences of their decisions.
We have to move on, but it's clear the shadow of the MAX crisis stretches far beyond just the 737 line. It's affecting their other big products, like the 777X.
Right, the 777X is meant to be a new flagship. It's Boeing's largest capacity twin jet ever built, designed to compete directly with the Airbus A350.
The maiden flight was back in January 2020.
And yet, the program has just been a perpetual exercise in delays. It really demonstrates the issues with quality and design maturity across the entire commercial airplanes division.
So what happened?
Well, the first delay came after a serious flight test incident in 2021, which pushed the first delivery back to 2024.
And then it happened again.
Then further technical problems with the engine and structural testing were found in 2022, forcing them to push the delivery date back again to 2025.
That's a 6-year delay from the original timeline.
And those repeated setbacks just erode customer confidence and dramatically increase the development costs.
Which leads us to the most recent and, very public safety crisis, the one at the start of 2024. The Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 door plug incident.
This incident was just horrific for the people on board and deeply, deeply embarrassing for Boeing. Because it wasn't a complex software issue like MCS.
No.
It was a fundamental failure of manufacturing quality control.
So what happened exactly?
On January 5th, 2024, a 737 MX-9 experienced a rapid depressurization when a door plug just blew out, shortly after climbing past 16,000 feet.
It created a hole the size of a door in the side of the plane. The videos from that night were absolutely chilling.
The flight crew performed a heroic emergency landing, and everyone was medically okay, but it was a terrifying experience.
And the immediate fallout was severe.
The FAA immediately grounded 171 of the 737 MX-9 aircraft with that specific door plug design.
And then came the inspections, which confirmed it was a systemic problem.
Right. When United Airlines inspected its grounded jets, they immediately found loose bolts on several planes. But the NTSB preliminary report offered the clearest, most damning evidence. The findings indicated that 4 critical bolts, the ones that secure the door panel in place, were likely removed and not replaced during work at Boeing's factory in Renton.
Removed and not replaced. So that's a failure of process, not a failure of engineering.
Exactly. This points to a total breakdown of basic procedural integrity on the assembly line. It is the clearest possible manifestation of that cultural shift. Rushing production, ignoring checklists, sacrificing quality control to meet a schedule.
And that failure had immediate and lasting consequences. It triggered executive changes and, critically, it restarted the criminal probe.
In March 2024, the Justice Department opened a new criminal investigation. The stakes here are just astronomical.
Why?
This new probe is focused on whether Boeing violated the terms of that original 2021 Deferred Prosecution Agreement.
The DPA we talked about earlier.
Exactly. If they're found to have violated it, the previous criminal conspiracy charge could be reinstated, leading to potentially massive new penalties.
And that pressure immediately led to changes at the very top.
CEO Dave Calhoun and Board Chairman Larry Kellner both announced they would be stepping down. It was a clear admission that the company had failed to solve the safety and quality issues that had plagued them since 2018.
And despite all that chaos, the sources say Boeing is already planning for a future without the 737 MX family.
That's a huge move. Plans were reported for a new single-aisle airplane, specifically designed to succeed the 737 MX. This is Boeing's attempt to regain market share from its rival, Airbus.
They know they need a fresh start with a new product line to restore trust.
They absolutely have to.
To understand why Boeing behaved this way, why they prioritize deadlines over safety, we really have to follow the money.
The financial reality of the last few years has been incredibly challenging.
The 2024 financial report is a mess.
It's a direct reflection of the production stops, the quality crises, all of it. Revenue was about $66.5 billion, but the company recorded a negative operating income of almost $11 billion, a net loss of nearly $12 billion.
And total equity was negative.
Negative $3.9 billion. It's a staggering loss for a company of this scale.
Yet, just a decade prior, they were celebrated for their cash flow management. The sources detail a pre-crisis cash strategy that looks highly aggressive in retrospect.
This is the crux of the cultural shift. Between 2010 and 2018, Boeing aggressively boosted its operating cash flow from $3 billion to over $15 billion dollars.
And how did they do that?
Through classic financial maneuvering, they negotiated highly favorable advance payments from customers for planes that hadn't even been built yet, and at the same time, they delayed payments to their network of suppliers.
So they were essentially using their customers and suppliers as short-term lenders to inflate their immediate cash position.
Exactly. And the sources warn that this strategy is highly volatile. It only works as long as orders are good and delivery rates are increasing. The second that flow stops, the model collapses.
Which is what happened.
It's exactly what happened during the axe grounding and the pandemic.
And what was the primary use for all that cash they generated?
To reward shareholders. This is the clearest possible sign of the bean counterculture dominating. Between 2013 and 2019, Boeing spent over $60 billion on dividends and stock buybacks.
Wait, 60 billion?
$60 billion. And to give you some context for that number, that amount was twice the entire development cost of the highly complex, technologically advanced 787 Dreamliner.
Wow.
They chose to spend two research and development budgets for a flagship plane on inflating their stock price rather than reinvesting in engineering excellence or quality control.
That one fact just perfectly illustrates where their priorities were during that critical pre-crisis decade.
And then the external shocks hit. First the MAX groundings, and then the COVID-19 pandemic.
The pandemic hammered the whole industry, and Boeing was already crippled.
It was a confluence of disasters. It led to massive losses and devastating job cuts. They cut over 12,000 jobs in May 2020 alone. By October 2020, nearly 30,000 employees had been let go.
They were forced into survival mode, and the troubles just continued into 2024.
The financial bleeding was relentless. The company lost $5 billion in the third quarter of 2024 alone.
Which forced them into a pretty desperate situation.
Right. It led to a massive $19 billion share sale to raise cash. They needed that injection to cover their costs and, critically, to avoid a potential downgrade to junk bond status.
Which would have made borrowing money way more expensive.
Exponentially more. And the operational problems translated directly into reduced output. Plane deliveries fell sharply from 136 in the second quarter of 2023 to just 92 in the second quarter of 2024.
And these financial woes were compounded by massive coordinated labor unrest in 2024 that brought manufacturing to a standstill.
The 2024 machinist strike was a major test of wills. Members of the IAM labor union felt their contributions were just being undervalued.
Especially after all the stock buybacks and executive pay hikes.
Of course, they voted overwhelmingly to reject the contract offer 94%.
Yeah.
And 96% voted to strike. The walkout began September 13th, and it lasted for 7 weeks.
A 7-week walkout right in the middle of a massive quality crisis. What were they fighting for?
Significant wage increases, improved retirement security, and restoring benefits and bonus schemes that had been cut during that financial engineering era.
They were demanding that the wealth created by their labor be redirected away from shareholders and back toward the workforce.
Exactly. And in the middle of all this, Boeing announced plans to cut another 17,000 jobs, about 10% of its workforce, to align with our financial reality.
So they were laying people off while the others were on strike.
Right. And they had to delay the first 777X deliveries by another full year because of the strike.
But the workers ultimately won a very substantial deal, didn't they?
They did. The strike ended on November 5th after workers accepted a significantly improved offer. It was historic. A 38% pay rise over 4 years, a $12,000 ratification bonus, and the bonus scheme was reinstated.
A clear victory for labor.
They leveraged the company's deep crisis to secure major concessions. But the damage was done. Boeing delivered only 348 aircraft in 2024, its lowest output since the pandemic.
Let's talk about one critical move the company made to try and stabilize things, bringing a key part of its supply chain back in-house.
Right. In June 2024, Boeing agreed to reacquire its longtime supplier, Spirit AeroSystems.
And Spirit is the company that manufactures the fuselages for the 737 MX.
Including the specific door plug that failed in the Alaska Airlines incident. This move was a clear admission that Boeing had lost control over critical elements of its quality process when it spun Spirit off back in 2005. The deal was valued at $4.7 billion.
But even a sensible move like that runs into the complexities of global regulation because of Boeing's massive reach.
Absolutely. The FTC stepped in due to antitrust concerns. They pointed out that Spirit AeroSystems also supplies major parts to competitors, like Airbus.
So the FTC requested that Boeing sell off those specific Spirit assets that supplied their rivals.
Right. And EU regulators confirmed that this divestiture fully addressed their concerns. It just shows that every single move Boeing makes, even to solve its own internal problems, is scrutinized on a massive international stage.
So moving from the factory floor to the global stage, we need to talk about Boeing's role not just as a business, but as a political and economic actor.
Their influence in Washington, D.C. is immense. The headquarters move to Virginia was explicitly designed to capitalize on that.
They are structurally tied to the U.S. federal government through defense contracts.
Right. In 2008 and 2009, they were the second largest U.S. federal contractor, with contracts totaling over $22 billion annually. That guaranteed pipeline of revenue gives them profound influence.
And they don't shy away from using that influence through lobbying.
Not at all. In 2009 alone, they spent almost $17 million on lobbying. And historically, their political ties have crossed ethical lines.
What do the sources say?
They indicate that between 1995 and 2021, the company paid $4.3 billion to settle 84 instances of misconduct. A huge chunk of that $615 million in 2006 was for illegal activities like hiring government officials and improperly using competitor information.
And the relationship between the company and the government sometimes operates almost like a form of foreign policy.
U.S. diplomatic cables have shown diplomats and senior politicians actively intervening abroad to boost sales for Boeing. And domestically, they're highly effective at securing state-level benefits. In 2013, they got the highest-ever tax breaks negotiated at the state level in U.S. history.
This intense focus on maximizing profit led to some really intense public criticism.
In 2011, the Group Public Campaign released a damning critique. It covered 2008 to 2010. During those 3 years, Boeing made almost $10 billion in profit.
And they paid no federal income tax.
In fact, they received $178 million in tax rebates. At the same time, they laid off nearly 15,000 workers and increased the pay of their top 5 executives by 31%.
That dynamic, where profits are maximized at the expense of the tax base and the workforce, became a major political flashpoint.
It did, but on the defense side, their political presence ensures they continue to secure enormous contracts that stabilize the whole organization.
Like the big win in March 2025.
A contract to build the U.S. Air Force's new next-generation air dominance fighter. It's valued at more than $20 billion and really underscores the crucial role BDS plays as the company's financial anchor.
The defense side of the business, however, is inseparable from profound ethical scrutiny and accusations of war profiteering, and we need to address this impartially, focusing only on the facts from the source material.
The criticism arises from Boeing's status as a major supplier of military hardware used in active conflicts. For instance, the firm has been criticized for supplying weapons used in the conflict in Yemen.
With reports that their missiles were used in indiscriminate attacks?
Right, resulting in civilian casualties. The scale is significant. In 2017, Boeing signed a massive deal with Saudi Arabia for military aircraft and guided missile systems.
And more recently, the focus has shifted to Boeing's extensive contracts tied to Israeli military operations, particularly concerning the Gaza war.
Researchers estimated that Boeing generated somewhere between $50 and $100 billion in revenue from Israeli weapons contracts between 2009 and 2022.
And during the active Gaza war, the company played a crucial supply role.
They did. For example, in October 2023, they expedited the delivery of 1,000 small-diameter smart bombs to Israel.
And the financial market reacted immediately to this increased demand.
Sources note that Boeing's stock price soared specifically due to the influx of these additional Israeli weapons contracts during the conflict. And this direct financial gain fueled a very robust public backlash.
What form did that backlash take?
There were widespread organized mass demonstrations. Protesters tried to block weapons shipments at Boeing facilities in Missouri, Washington, and Oregon.
And these protests were driven by accusations that the weapons contributed to violations of international humanitarian law.
Yes. The sources specifically mentioned that the Boeing GBU-39 small-diameter bombs were reportedly used in the bombings of several civilian structures, including a Rafah refugee camp and 2 different schools. This drew direct public scrutiny onto the company's role.
And this political pressure even extended to their academic relationships.
Precisely. Students at multiple universities, Florida State, University of Washington, St. Louis University, called for their institutions to divest from or break research partnerships with Boeing.
It just highlights the deep moral complexity the company faces, where its defense revenue directly clashes with its goals for global commercial acceptance.
Exactly.
Finally, let's turn to Boeing's relationship with the environment, its massive emissions footprint, and its stated commitments to sustainability.
Historically, Boeing has faced environmental challenges. A 2006 study revealed toxic and radioactive waste contamination at the Santa Susana Field Laboratory, a former test site. They reached a cleanup agreement with the EPA in 2017.
But looking at their current footprint, the emissions numbers are enormous, and they're overwhelmingly dominated by a specific type, Scope 3 emissions.
Right. In 2024, Boeing's total emissions were about 374 million metric tons of CO2, and a staggering 373 million of that was Scope 3.
So for our listeners, Scope 3 means indirect emissions,
Right. The emissions created before the company's direct task, like making raw materials, and more significantly, those created after the product leaves the factory.
which in Boeing's case is the fuel burned by the planes they sell.
Exactly. The biggest part of their carbon problem isn't the factory, it's the lifetime of the product. Boeing estimated that each jet delivered in 2020 would add, on average, 1 million tons of CO2 to the atmosphere over its 20-year lifespan.
That is an enormous figure.
It makes them structurally responsible for a massive portion of the aviation sector's contribution to climate change.
And the company recognizes that climate change is an existential risk to their business, not just environmentally, but through supply chain disruptions. What are their goals to mitigate this?
They are heavily invested in sustainable aviation fuel, or SF. They aim to make S solutions suitable for their entire commercial fleet by 2030, and they've committed to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050.
And what kind of impact did that actually have?
Boeing estimates that biofuels like algae fuel or jatropha plant blends could reduce flight-related greenhouse gas emissions by 60 to 80%.
And this isn't just theoretical.
They've tested it.
As far back as 2008, a test flight using a jatropha biofuel mixture showed no ill effects on performance. Their commitment to solving this Scope 3 problem is one of the biggest technical challenges they face, rivaling the need to fix their manufacturing culture. So, if we synthesize this entire deep dive, the story of Boeing is really one of immense, almost unbelievable technical capacity.
I mean, they build rockets, defense systems, the world's mobility infrastructure, but their recent narrative is completely consumed by internal conflict. That tension between legendary engineering excellence and the relentless pressure for quarterly financial returns. It was permanently codified by that 1997 merger. The culture of the bean counters just usurped the culture of the engineers.
And that cultural rot manifested directly in the deadly software flaws of the 737 MX, the fundamental failures of quality control in the 2024 door plug blowout, the financial distress, and that massive, costly 7-week labor strike.
It all circles back to that core prioritization of cash flow and deadlines over technical rigor.
The learner now has a comprehensive view of the forces driving Boeing, and we should note the company is structurally trying to turn a corner on governance.
They are. The CEO and chair roles were separated back in 2019, and the new president and CEO, Kelly Ortberg, who took over in 2024, has already met directly with the FAA to discuss the path forward, emphasizing a renewed commitment to safety.
But even with a reset, the ethical complexity here remains unresolved.
It absolutely does.
I mean, consider this. Boeing is making massive investments in sustainability, committing to biofuels, aiming for net zero by 2050 because commercial aviation requires a long-term future.
Right.
Yet at the same time, the financial success of their defense sector is so great that their stock price soars during global conflicts, confirming that war is profoundly profitable for them.
So the essential question for Boeing's future isn't just about safety or whether they can design a new plane. It's whether a single multinational corporation can successfully reconcile the violently conflicting ethical and financial demands of providing global commercial mobility, achieving planetary responsibility, and fueling global conflict.
What does the idea of corporate citizenship truly prioritize when the revenue segments that guarantee solvency are so deeply intertwined with defense and war? That is the ultimate existential test of Boeing's corporate identity moving forward, something for you to mull over as you process the complexity of this giant.